We have, the census can be used to undertake spatial analysis of living standards. This is work we did using 2001 census data for the York crime audit. These are enumeration districts, I think, rather than output areas. And it's using the Breadline Britain Index, which is a census-based index based on 5 or 6 questions in the census, which have something to do with material living standards.
If you think of the major problem with the household survey, which I think a lot of people have yet to understand, is the household surveys don't include people who aren't in households. I know that sounds stupid, but I can tell you that the vast majority of survey designers don't realise that simple point. So they omit homeless populations. They also omit institutionalised populations. This is all by design, nothing to do with difficult design.
What wouldn't we know if we hadn't had a census, and do we really need to know it? The first work that came out from the census statistics that were not the one number was produced by Stephen Givaz and Lily Simpson. Within a week, this is a record, within a week of the area statistics being released in December, they produced a series of reports to the Boundary Foundation here in York, showing that every ethnic and religious group in Britain had become more spread out, apart from Jewish people in London. And the only way in which Jewish people became less spread out was by having more babies, which is the way of being concentrated. The 1971 census, it took until 1978, I think, before we got anything published.
There are a number of different measures of segregation that have developed since the 60s and 70s. I list 5 of them over here: evenness, exposure, clustering, centralization, concentration. The trouble with these more traditional measures is that they're non-spatial, they're aspatial. And this leads to 2 problems: the checkerboard and comparability problem. The checkerboard problem rises from the fact that each unit, each neighborhood is considered in isolation from each other. So it neglects the overall social composition of the space. So on the left-hand side, you have on the left and right-hand side, you have exactly the same numbers of poor people or black squares, but very different levels of inequality.
Can you put your hands up if you know what happened electorally in 1994 in New Zealand? More people, I'm sure some people know, but not saying. Yes. Yes, exactly. It was a change to PR, and it was as a result of a referendum. The result of the change to PR was, the change to PR had, I think, probably positive effects in a wide range of aspects. This is what happened in the UK in 2010. We had a general election on the first past the post, and according to Gavin Thompson of the, who's a statistician at the House of Parliament Support Agency, the Conservatives won 36 of the votes, but 47% of the seats. Lib Dems did badly in proportion, but curiously, or maybe not so curiously, they benefited just about as much as the Tories from the system. See why the Labour Party doesn't want to campaign for anything else.
Okay? Because they're all competing for the same thing. They're all competing for their idea of population growth for reasons which are to do with their understanding of their taxation base and also potential catastrophes, which we've seen illustrated rather well in the first presentation in this session. I think there's some interesting things to ask about the causal chain of population. I'm interested in what causes things. The components, employment prospects, housing demand versus housing need, because we're in this particular 2 local authorities, we're proposing over a 20-year period to build houses at twice the rate in the face of what I think has been accurately identified as non-coming depression.
That's what I'm trying to say, is that there is still this level of uncertainty which we can't get away from. And I think what I'm going to hand over to Ben now, he's going to talk about what we do in terms of people who are interested in inequality and interested in kind of the political argument. How do we go out into the public sphere and make this argument when the evidence is so uncertain?
So, seamlessly, a breakthrough transition. So this leads us on to the question of Has the spirit level politicised scientific debate? A question that I hasten to add at this stage, I am not going to give you a definitive answer to, but I'm going to raise some questions back. But before I do, I think it's important to be clear of what I mean by politicisation. So, without going into a long and possibly uninteresting tangent that I'm happy to do later about what social science is for, I'm taking it as read that social science is there to do two things. It's firstly there to try and produce a more truthful picture of the social world than other competing sources of knowledge, but it also has a pivotal role to do with social critique. And I think that any account of social science that tries to say only does one of these things is clearly not a good description of what it is we do as social scientists.
The real test of a scientific theory, I did several years with Popper as a student at LSE, is whether it makes novel predictions. The first test of the theory that there was that inequality mattered, when I and someone else had shown the relationships internationally, was it was tested out simultaneously by people at the Harvard School of Public Health and the University of Michigan to see if the same thing was true in the 50 states.
So, why Bradford? Why is Bradford an interesting place to look at? It was really interesting this morning hearing about York, because I think that so many of the things that we were talking about are the exact opposite in Bradford. So particularly from the sort of perspective of the study that we're working on, Bradford has very high levels of health problems in a whole range of different areas, particularly very high infant mortality. It's some of the highest in the country, even though it's been improving in the last few years.
In cities, within areas, reduces trust. You could see this as two sides of the same coin, really, because ethnic diversity is often related to high social inequality. And I want to look at this relationship between social inequality and trust within Bradford.
A few pictures for you of the sort of housing conditions. So you can see this is a closed off court. You can see their water pump in the middle, which was there for that court and the front houses. And you can just about see the gully that was the only drainage that they had. Here's another one, and you can see a woman there using the pump, and just how ineffective the drainage was, as there's now a stagnant pool of water there. Yet another showing this is a closed off court, and that's the only entrance that you've got into this. They're all looking sad at the moment because they're about to be evicted from this house, so, you know. And this is your only sanitary thing, that you've got two privies that were over a communal ash pit, often without working doors, often without any sort of extra drainage. You can see that there is a pool that's collected outside.
In both those periods, the 1920s and the post-1980s, that experience ended up with recession. If we can just look at that last period in more detail, this is for the United States. This shows that, and it's now well known, many of you will be familiar with this, there's been a lot of press coverage of it, how real wages in the United States have been little better than static over the last, well, in fact, in the States it goes back to the mid-1970s, where productivity has been racing ahead. So we've had a bigger and bigger gap between wages and productivity. And something very similar has happened in the United Kingdom, only it started about a decade later. So the light blocks are productivity and the dark blocks are wages, and you can see that wages started falling behind productivity in the United Kingdom from the beginning of the 1990s, and again at an accelerating rate. So this gap, and by the way, again, just as you can apply the U-curve graph in terms of the changing nature of inequality at the top to the majority of which countries, these wage productivity gaps have also started to follow later and slightly shallower in a significant proportion of rich nations.